For those of you who've really dug into, the deep currents of human belief, you've probably sensed it, this profound, almost uncanny recurring pattern
Right.
in how foundational spiritual systems, ethical systems get started. We're talking figures like Jesus, the Buddha, Socrates, Guru Nanak, figures who, at first glance might seem worlds apart.
Completely different context.
Yeah, exactly. Yet they seem to share this common, really powerful archetype right at their core.
Yeah.
So today, we're not just observing this pattern. We're going on a real deep dive into this archetype. It's known as the Sacrificial Catalyst.
And this isn't just about looking back at historical figures, is it?
No, not at all. It's about trying to uncover a universal, almost biological-seeming mechanism, how societies face their deepest wounds, how they heal, and ultimately how they evolve.
Okay. So our mission today really is to unpack this recurring pattern. And we're drawing directly from a pretty powerful academic work. It's titled The Sacrificial Catalyst, Collective Pain to Purpose, a cross-cultural analysis of how individual purpose, forged from collective pain, forms the foundation of religious systems.
It's quite a title.
It is. But this deep dive, it's going to systematically analyze how these extraordinary individuals take profound collective suffering, the pain of their times, and transform it, turn it into these enduring spiritual and cultural movements. It gives us a really fresh lens, I think, for understanding human history.
And what you, our listener, will hopefully gain from this is a genuinely fresh, multidisciplinary perspective, a new way to view the very foundations of major religious systems, ethical systems. We'll explore how things like courage, selflessness, sacrifice, they don't just inspire change in one person. They can actually be the bedrock, the foundation for lasting societal regeneration.
Right.
So yeah, get ready for some potentially deep insights because this is where it gets, I think, truly fascinating. So let's start by grounding ourselves. The core concept, the sacrificial catalyst. When we use this term, what exactly are we talking about? Who or what defines this archetype?
Okay, so at its heart, the sacrificial catalyst is a specific type of historical human figure. Think about someone who, during their life, becomes incredibly attuned to the pervasive pain or the crisis or maybe the deep-seated dysfunction of their era.
So it's more than just noticing things are bad.
Oh, much more. It's not just intellectual understanding. It's like an internalization, a deeply felt burden of that collective suffering. That could be, political oppression, moral decay, widespread injustice, maybe just a deep existential angst.
Right.
But here's the really crucial part. They don't just passively feel this pain, they actively transmute it. They turn this suffering into a purposeful mission, one rooted in self-sacrifice, dedicated entirely to the collective good. So they become these pivotal agents, these catalysts, sparking profound social and spiritual transformation. And the truly remarkable outcome, their very acts of sacrifice go on to inspire and validate belief systems that persist.
For ages.
Exactly. Across vast stretches of time and geography, shaping entire civilizations for millennia.
So it's not just someone who suffers maybe as a side effect of their work. It's someone who chooses to embody that suffering, to sacrifice themselves for a larger purpose. And that specific intentional act ignites something profound, something lasting.
That's the core of it, the intentionality.
And this concept, it moves beyond just strict historical accounts, doesn't it? The source mentions these figures often blend legendary and historical narratives.
Precisely, yeah. The narratives around these figures, they're rarely just dry historical records.
Yeah.
Instead, you often see them presented as simultaneously human, with relatable struggles and also kind of quasi-divine.
Right, larger than life.
Exactly, with extraordinary capacities or insights. Their stories aren't just chronicles of what happened. They become these rich, symbolic tapestries that speak directly to universal human experiences.
Like tyranny, chaos.
Yeah, or pervasive ignorance, or that deep spiritual emptiness we sometimes feel. These catalysts emerge, offering a path forward, a sense of meaning. And what's truly fascinating here is the complex interplay, that dynamic between their individual courage, their profound selflessness,
And the legacy.
and the massive, enduring cultural legacy that then builds up around their stories. You see successive generations actively taking these foundational narratives, codifying them into institutionalized religions or ethical frameworks, societal norms.
And the thesis calls this the formation of cultural remnants.
That's the term, yes, a cultural remnants. It's how the memory, the lessons, the motivational power of these founders live on. They adapt, they evolve across time, but the core sacrifice remains resonant.
That brings us to a really central concept that helps us understand why these catalysts emerge. The term used is sociocultural homeostasis. Sounds a bit academic, maybe.
It does sound a bit weighty, yeah.
But the analogy used in the source makes it incredibly intuitive, I found.
It really does. Think about it biologically. When our body gets a cut or a virus invades, it doesn't just give up, right?
Yeah, it fights back.
It has these incredible inherent mechanisms, cooperative ones, that kick in to repair the damage, restore balance, get back to equilibrium, homeostasis.
Okay.
So in the same way, societies can experience what the thesis calls cultural pathologies, things like widespread injustice, profound moral breakdown, deep societal divisions, maybe a loss of collective meaning.
A kind of societal sickness.
Exactly. And sociocultural homeostasis is the idea that societies possess a similar, though obviously more complex, self-correcting mechanism.
And the sacrificial catalyst fits in how?
They are positioned as a vital agent in this collective correction. They offer a universal model for how the beginnings of religions or major ethical shifts can serve this fundamental psychosocial function. It's about how societies find a way back to equilibrium, back to a renewed sense of purpose and cohesion after facing profound disruption and suffering.
Wow, so it's like a natural societal repair system in a way.
In a way, yes. A very profound, human-driven repair system.
So this isn't just one academic field trying to explain this. The thesis takes a truly multidisciplinary approach to tackle this complex idea. Can you elaborate a bit on how these different lenses contribute?
Absolutely. And that's really where the rigor and depth of this work come from. It's not just looking from one angle. It draws insights from comparative religion, first off. That allows us to see recurring patterns across diverse faiths that might otherwise seem completely distinct.
Right, finding the common threads.
Exactly. Then from history, obviously, it provides the essential context, understanding the specific pain of the era each catalyst actually emerged from. What were the real-world conditions? Then you bring in Jungian psychology. That helps us grasp the deep, universal archetypal patterns in the human mind that make these stories of sacrifice resonate so powerfully across cultures. It's almost like they're hardwired into our collective psyche.
The story just clicks somehow.
It does. Then, the sociology of religion helps us understand how these movements become institutionalized. How does a single powerful act evolve into enduring social structures, shared beliefs, rituals?
Okay.
And finally, philosophy lets us delve into the profound ethical questions, the existential dimensions of these choices and their lasting impact. What does it mean to sacrifice? What is purpose?
So it pulls from all these areas.
Yes. And the overarching goal across all these disciplines is to clearly illuminate how these figures identify that pain of the era, how they embody courage and love by consciously accepting self-sacrifice, and then how their legacy forms the bedrock of these lasting religious and ethical frameworks that continue to shape human civilization today.
And to guide this whole investigation, the source lays out some key research questions. What are the central inquiries driving this deep dive?
Yeah, these questions really frame the entire inquiry, directing us to the core insights. First, what characteristics define the sacrificial catalyst archetype across different cultures and epochs?
Finding the common denominator.
Exactly. What are those irreducible commonalities that transcend time and place? Then we ask, how do these individuals internalize collective suffering and transform it into personal and social purpose? This gets into that profound, almost alchemical internal process, turning pain into meaning.
And then crucially, there's the question of the act itself, right? What role does self-sacrifice play in validating their mission and mobilizing followers? Because that sacrificial act seems to be the linchpin, the ultimate proof of their conviction, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. It's the ultimate validation in many cases.
And following that, how are these narratives institutionalized and adapted by subsequent generations? This speaks to how these movements actually last, how they endure and shape societies for centuries.
Right. How does the initial spark become an enduring flame? And finally, the big overarching question that pulls it all together. Can this process be conceptualized as a natural self-correcting mechanism within human societies?
That's the sociocultural homeostasis idea again.
Exactly. That's where it really comes to the forefront, shifting our perspective. Ultimately, this deep dive aims to move the study of religion away from focusing only on doctrine or divine interpretations, what people believe, towards understanding religious founders as essential human agents, people who facilitate societal and spiritual regeneration through acts of profound love, conscious sacrifice, and a clearly articulated purpose. It's a very human-centered way of looking at it, but incredibly profound in its implications for how belief systems are born and evolve.
That reframing makes a lot of sense. It feels more grounded somehow.
Yeah.
Now let's take an even deeper dive into the historical and theoretical roots. Because this concept of a sacrificial catalyst, it isn't entirely new, right? Even if this specific model is. Scholars have been circling around aspects of this for over a century.
Oh, absolutely. The groundwork has been laid over a long time.
Let's start with how archetypes, sacrificial figures, and myth have been understood in religious formation. Where does that history begin?
Well, one of the truly pioneering works you have to mention is James Fraser's monumental study, The Golden Bough. First published way back in 1890.
A classic.
Absolutely. Fraser was meticulous. He spent decades examining how this motif of the dying and reviving king or a sacred figure echoed across just wildly disparate mythologies and folk traditions all over the world.
Like Osiris, Dionysus.
Exactly, those kinds of figures, whose stories involve death and rebirth. Fraser argued pretty strongly that these stories weren't just, quaint folklore or entertainment. They performed vital ritual and social functions. In these ancient myths, the king's symbolic or sometimes literal sacrifice wasn't just a tragedy. It was often seen as a necessary act that ensured things like agricultural fertility, brought cosmic and social order, and basically facilitated cultural renewal. He really showed how myth, psychology, society, they're all deeply intertwined, often through the figure of a sacrificing leader.
And from Fraser, we jump forward a bit to someone whose name many listeners will definitely recognize, Joseph Campbell. His iconic work, The Hero with a Thousand Faces, from 1949.
Campbell, yes. Absolutely essential.
He took these early ideas and gave us the concept of the monomyth, didn't he? The hero's journey.
Yes, Campbell famously introduced the concept of the monomyth, this universal hero's journey. A narrative structure he found repeated again and again in stories from all across the globe, transcending specific cultures and historical eras.
Departure, initiation, return.
Exactly. In this monomyth, a hero departs from their ordinary world. They face a series of trials, transformations in some kind of extraordinary realm, and then they return. And crucially, a central part of this journey often involves the hero's self-sacrifice.
But not for personal gain.
No, that's key. Not for personal gain or glory, but specifically to revitalize or heal or bring enlightenment back to their community. Campbell's synthesis is just brilliant because he shows that whether you're talking about Christ or Buddha or Socrates or even way back to an ancient figure like Gilgamesh on his quest,
Right.
the sacrificial catalyst figure consistently sits right at the very center of how civilizations understand themselves. They are the ones who dare to venture into the unknown, endure immense hardship, get transformed, and then bring something new and vital back for everyone else.
And speaking of these universal patterns that resonate so deeply across humanity, this brings us squarely to Carl Jung and his concept of archetypes.
Jung's contribution here is absolutely fundamental. If you want to understand why these figures emerge and why their stories resonate so deeply, you have to look at Jung. He proposed that archetypes are these primordial, universal psychological patterns. They exist in what he called the collective unconscious.
A shared reservoir of human experience.
Exactly, a shared reservoir of experience and imagery that transcends individual minds. So when we talk about the sacrificial catalyst, Jung would argue that the archetype of the self-sacrificing redeemer, or the hero, emerges cyclically, almost predictably.
When society needs it most.
Precisely. In response to deep collective needs. When a society is in crisis or experiencing profound collective pain, this archetypal pattern surfaces. It finds expression in specific individuals who are, in a sense, compelled to take on that role, acting out this universal drama of renewal.
And then Mircea Eliade, in The Myth of the Eternal Return, he adds another crucial layer to this, focusing on ritual.
Eliade does, yeah. He further solidifies this by arguing that rituals which reenact sacrifice, whether they're ancient ceremonies celebrating the harvest or modern religious rites like, say, communion, they serve a profound purpose.
Connecting to something timeless.
Exactly. They connect individuals and societies with a cosmic transcendent order. They allow people to participate in timeless, sacred events. He really underscored the profound role of religious founders, including our sacrificial catalysts, as mediators.
Bridging the gap.
Yes. They stand between the raw, often overwhelming experience of existential suffering and the hope for meaning, order, liberation. They help bridge that huge gap for their followers, offering a pathway to transcendence.
Okay, so we've explored the archetypal, the mythical side of sacrifice, but sacrifice isn't just about ancient stories or symbolic figures. It's also a powerful, sometimes almost brutal social mechanism. Scholars have studied this from psychological, sociological angles, too.
Very much so.
Let's look at some of those theories. And here, we absolutely have to talk about René Girard. His ideas of mimetic desire and the scapegoat mechanism are pretty intense.
Girard's theory is incredibly insightful, yeah, and it can be a stark look at human nature. He focuses on mimetic desire, the idea that our desires often aren't spontaneous. They're shaped by watching what others desire, which leads to rivalry, conflict.
Keeping up with the Joneses writ large.
Kind of, yeah, but with potentially violent consequences. When these mimetic rivalries escalate, societies can become gripped by collective violence, collective anxiety. Girard posited that to restore order, societies often unconsciously channel this collective aggression onto a single figure, often an innocent one.
The scapegoat.
The scapegoat. The death or expulsion of this scapegoat then restores a fragile social order, at least temporarily, by deflecting that internal violence outward or onto one individual. What's truly fascinating about Girard's work is how he traces this primal mechanism back to the very foundation of myths of martyrdom and salvation.
So the catalyst embodies the scapegoat.
In a Girardian sense, yes, the sacrificial catalyst embodies this scapegoat figure absorbing the collective tension and violence. But, and this is crucial, their sacrifice ultimately transforms that energy into something generative, something foundational for a new, often more peaceful or just order. It's a stark idea, but very powerful.
That is powerful, and yeah, sometimes uncomfortable. This notion of the scapegoat becoming the foundation for something new. Then there's Max Weber, with his indispensable concept of the charismatic leader.
Weber's sociology of religion is essential here, especially for understanding how these movements actually take hold and last. He introduced the concept of the charismatic leader.
Someone with exceptional qualities.
Yes, someone who's exceptional, sometimes perceived as almost supernatural or divine. Qualities enable him to redefine group values, inspire immense devotion, command unwavering loyalty. But crucially, Weber showed how the leader's sacrifice, whether that's voluntary suffering, radical renunciation of worldly things, or outright martyrdom, serves to legitimize these new moral and religious orders.
It proves they mean it.
It does. This sacrifice acts as a powerful seal of authenticity. It demonstrates an unshakable commitment to their vision, which then deeply resonates with followers. And then, these new orders, initially totally dependent on that charismatic leader.
They get institutionalized.
They get institutionalized, or routinized, as Weber called it, into churches, sects, broader movements, carrying the legacy of that original sacrifice forward even long after the founder is gone.
And bringing it into a more modern sociological light, Berger and Luckman, in their famous work, The Social Construction of Reality, they show how these narratives become part of our everyday world, right? Shaping reality itself.
Precisely. They illuminated how narratives of sacrifice aren't just historical facts we remember, they become deeply woven into the very fabric of social reality.
How does that work?
They're told and retold, reenacted, ritualized. They shape collective identity, collective memory, structures of authority, all through these powerful symbolic processes. This means the sacrifice isn't just an event that happened way back when. It's an ongoing, living story that helps define who people are, what they believe, how their society functions. It becomes part of the shared, taken-for-granted world.
Now, the thesis argues that this pattern, the sacrificial catalyst, is confirmed across really widely disparate traditions. That's a pretty bold claim. How does comparative religion actually reinforce this?
It is a bold claim, yeah, but the evidence presented across different faiths is compelling. It's quite consistent. Think about Christianity. The crucifixion of Jesus is the absolute epitome of the sacrificial catalyst. Its profound reinterpretation across countless cultures, countless epochs, is truly remarkable. It underpins a global faith. Then in Buddhism, you have Siddhartha Gautama's radical renunciation, giving up his princely life, his austere journey to enlightenment, his ultimate compassion. These are all ritualized, echoed in teachings, in monastic practice. They form the core of a vast ethical and spiritual system.
Right.
Sikhism traces its entire ethical vision back to Guru Nanak's rejection of caste, of religious strife. Stories of his endurance, his travels, his inclusive love. These are the foundational narratives.
And it's not just explicitly religious founders. You mentioned Socrates earlier.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Even secular icons fit the pattern. Socrates choosing death over abandoning his philosophical quest. He gains this mythic status as a martyr for truth, fundamentally shaping Western philosophical and ethical identity. What's really striking here is how universal the underlying pattern appears, even when the cultural trappings are completely different.
So these cultural remnants you mentioned earlier, how do they fit in with this comparative view? How does the sacrifice live on?
Oh, cultural remnants are absolutely key to understanding the longevity, the adaptability of these movements. See, successor generations don't just passively inherit these stories, they actively adapt the foundational sacrifices.
To their own time and place.
Exactly, to their own local norms, their historical context, the new challenges they face. Each tradition stylizes the original sacrifice in its own way, embedding it in art, in ritual, in law, in collective memory, in ways that resonate within their specific environment.
Can you give examples?
Sure. Think of the Christian Eucharist, or Buddhist monastic discipline, or the importance of Socratic dialogues in philosophy, or the Sikh practice of langar, the communal meal. These are all ways that those foundational sacrifices are ritually embedded, kept alive. Though it's important to bring in someone like the anthropologist Talal Asad here, he offers a crucial critique, reminding us to look closely at how these institutionalizations both empower people and, at times, constrain the original religious meaning or practice. It's a dynamic process. It's always evolving, always being reinterpreted. The original sacrifice is continuously given new life, new meaning.
Okay, so while this all sounds incredibly unifying, like a grand theory, no academic work, especially one this ambitious, is without its debates, its gaps, right? What are some of those critical discussions happening in this area?
That's a vital point, and the thesis acknowledges these head on. It has to. While the sacrificial archetype is pretty consistently identified across cultures, there's still ongoing debate about its precise origins. Is it primarily a psychological pattern? Is it a sociological necessity? Is it rooted mostly in specific historical events? Or some combination?
And what about its function? Is it always positive?
That's another big question. Does it always lead to liberation and renewal? Or can this same mechanism sometimes be used for subjugation or social control? For instance, a feminist critique might point out, quite rightly, that this model often highlights these grand, singular, and frequently male acts of sacrifice.
Right.
And that might potentially overlook the everyday, ongoing sacrifices made by women or by marginalized groups, or the collective, maybe unsung efforts that also contribute significantly to societal healing.
So broadening the definition of sacrifice and catalyst.
Exactly. And similarly, post-colonial perspectives might question the universality of the archetype without fully acknowledging how power dynamics, how colonial histories shape the narratives themselves, who gets to be called a catalyst, whose suffering is glorified and whose is ignored. These critiques advocate for including overlooked figures, exploring alternative forms of healing and social repair that might not involve such a dramatic singular sacrifice.
Those are really important nuances. But despite those debates, those necessary critiques, there's still a kind of foundational consensus across scholars, isn't there, about the importance of these figures?
Absolutely. Across disciplines, history, psychology, sociology, there's broad agreement that the elevation of sacrificial figures provides an essential recurring mechanism. It's fundamental for social renewal, for forging group identity and cohesion, and for facilitating cultural adaptation. It seems to be a fundamental, deeply ingrained pattern in how human societies cope with crises, transmit values, and evolve, even if we don't agree on every interpretive detail or its implications.
Okay, and this brings us back to the synthesis, towards this refined theory of sociocultural homeostasis. This is where the real innovation of the thesis lies, you're saying, fusing all these disparate strands of thought together.
Yes. I think the unique contribution of this thesis is precisely that it proposes a unified theory. No existing work explicitly theorizes religious foundation as sociocultural homeostasis in this comprehensive way. This idea that societies possess this inherent capacity to self-correct pathologies through these inspired, purposeful acts of sacrifice.
But the building blocks were there.
Exactly. As we've just discussed, the existing scholarship from Fraser to Weber to Jung to Girard does supply all the necessary conceptual elements. The archetype itself, the power of narrative, the crucial role of ritual, the importance of charismatic leadership, the pervasive presence of collective suffering, and the process of institutionalization. This thesis advances the field by fusing these previously somewhat separate insights into a coherent, unified explanatory model. It provides both a robust conceptual framework and hopefully a path for future empirical research into how societies actually heal and evolve.
Okay, now let's bring this powerful framework really to life with specific examples. We've talked a lot about the theory, but the real test is whether it holds up when you look at the messy, often brutal reality of history. What stands out to you as we explore how these individuals embody the sacrificial catalyst archetype?
Okay, let's start with perhaps the most globally recognized example, Jesus of Nazareth. Central to Western civilization, central to billions worldwide, his era, the context he lived in, was profoundly shaped by that pain of the era. You had Roman imperial oppression, which was harsh. You had a rigid religious legalism that many found spiritually stifling. There was deep social division, rich and poor, Jew and Gentile, different sects, and a pervasive sense, reported in many sources, of spiritual corruption and alienation. These factors created an atmosphere of profound collective suffering.
And his personal purpose, as we understand it from the Gospels, seems directly tied to addressing that multifaceted pain, wasn't it?
Precisely. Jesus' mission, as portrayed in the New Testament, was really to tackle that spiritual corruption, that alienation, head-on. He did it through radical teachings, unconditional love, radical forgiveness, the imminent arrival of the kingdom of God, which promised a transformative new order.
Yeah.
And crucially, he explicitly embraced a destiny of profound suffering and death. You see this clearly in passages like Mark 8.31, where he predicts his own crucifixion. He presents it not as a defeat, but as a necessary redemptive act. This signifies a willing, conscious acceptance of immense personal sacrifice for collective salvation, for establishing a new covenant.
And the sacrifice itself, the crucifixion, became the ultimate validation, didn't it? The foundational event for his followers.
It really did. Yeah. The crucifixion, unique in its brutality, yes, but also in its profound theological significance, comes to symbolize ultimate self-giving love. It's the ultimate litmus test, the definitive proof of his unwavering commitment to his message, his mission. This profound public sacrifice validated Jesus' teachings in the eyes of his followers and absolutely galvanized a mass movement that continues to transform lives and societies across centuries, inspiring billions.
So how was that profound sacrifice then institutionalized? How did it become these cultural remnants?
Well, Christianity, as both a faith and a vast cultural force, institutionalized Jesus' life and teachings in many ways through core doctrines, like the incarnation, the idea of God becoming human, and the resurrection as triumph over death, through foundational rituals, most obviously the Eucharist or communion, which ritually reenacts his sacrifice as a central act of worship, and through the very church structures themselves, which were designed to preserve and propagate his message. His sacrifice became deeply embedded within the cultural remnants of countless societies, constantly adapted and reinterpreted through art, literature, law, music, collective memory. That ensures its continued relevance and power, generation after generation.
Okay. Next, let's turn east to Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha. His pain of the era was quite different from Jesus's, wasn't it? It seems more universal, maybe more existential.
Absolutely. Siddhartha's transformation from a sheltered prince into an enlightened teacher stems from his profound internalization of dukkha. This Pali word often translated as suffering, but it's deeper, like inherent unsatisfactoriness in human life.
Not just specific problems, but existence itself.
Kind of. He was confronted, famously, with the inescapable realities of sickness, old age, and death. He realized these weren't just personal misfortunes happening to some people. They were universal conditions for all humanity. This profound insight became the central pain of the era he identified. Not political oppression, not primarily social injustice, but this deep, pervasive human condition of suffering and unsatisfactoriness.
And his purpose then became finding a way out of that suffering, a path to liberation for everyone.
Exactly. He renounced his royal privilege, his wealth, his power, left his family, and dedicated himself to a path first of extreme asceticism, then meditation. This was his purposeful mission, seeking liberation from suffering, nirodha, not just for himself, but for all sentient beings. His journey through hardship and profound self-discipline was a very conscious choice.
How does his sacrifice fit into this model? He wasn't executed like Jesus. It was a different kind of sacrifice.
That's right. His sacrifice wasn't martyrdom in the same way. His great renunciation, leaving the palace, and his subsequent years of arduous discipline, seeking enlightenment, these are considered profound acts of self-sacrifice.
Giving up everything the world valued.
Exactly. He gave up worldly comfort, power, social status, familial ties. He embarked on a difficult, often solitary path of self-denial and profound introspection. It wasn't a violent end, but it was a radical reordering of his entire life, embodying his commitment to alleviating collective suffering through finding and teaching a path based on ethical conduct, wisdom, and compassion. His willingness to forsake everything for the truth demonstrated the absolute depth of his conviction.
And the institutional legacy of the Buddha's profound sacrifice, how did that take shape?
Well, Buddhism institutionalized his teachings through a vast collection of sacred texts, like the Pali Canon and Mahayana Sutras. through the establishment of monastic orders, the Sangha, which perpetuates his renunciatory lifestyle and preserves the teachings, and through various ritual practices that reinforce his path to enlightenment. His message and the powerful story of his renunciation were adapted across incredibly diverse Asian cultures, shaping art, philosophy, daily life, even political structures sometimes. They became deeply ingrained cultural remnants that continue to influence millions upon millions of people today.
Okay, now, for a figure many might not immediately put in the same category as religious founders, but who, according to this thesis, clearly fits the sacrificial catalyst archetype, Socrates.
Yes, Socrates. Not a spiritual leader in the traditional sense, certainly not founding a religion, but his impact on Western thought is just immeasurable.
What was his pain of the era? What was wrong with Athens, in his view?
Socrates, though not founding a religion, perfectly exemplifies the archetype within Western philosophy and ethics. His pain of the era was what he perceived as the Athenian moral and political crisis of the 5th century BCE. He saw widespread intellectual complacency, superficial knowledge being passed off as wisdom, and a kind of civic decay setting in after the Peloponnesian War.
He thought people weren't thinking clearly.
He believed the city was losing its ethical compass, that its citizens, especially the powerful ones, lacked true wisdom and virtue. They were engaging in sophistry, clever arguments without real substance, rather than genuinely seeking truth.
And his purpose was to shake things up, to expose that ignorance, make people truly think for themselves, which, as we know, often made him very unpopular.
Yes, precisely. He dedicated his life to exposing falsehood and encouraging genuine virtue and self-knowledge. He did this through his unique method of dialectics, this relentless, often quite confrontational, questioning of people's assumptions.
The Socratic method.
The Socratic method. He knew this would alienate powerful figures. He knew it would create hostility. But he accepted that cost as an integral part of what he saw as his divinely inspired mission, his daimonion guiding him to awaken Athens from its intellectual slumber.
And his ultimate sacrifice, of course, was his death. He was condemned by the Athenian court for impiety, for corrupting the youth.
Indeed. His ultimate sacrifice was his profound willingness to face death, rather than abandon his philosophical mission or compromise his principles. He was offered the chance to propose exile instead of death, or even escape prison later.
But he refused.
He refused. He famously chose to drink the hemlock, arguing it was better to suffer injustice than to commit it by disobeying the city's laws, even unjust ones. He became a martyr for truth, for moral integrity, and for the very pursuit of wisdom itself. This final act profoundly validated his entire philosophy, imbuing his teachings with an undeniable moral authority that echoes down through centuries.
And the monumental legacy he left behind, it's astonishing, especially since he never wrote anything himself.
It really is astonishing. His followers, most notably Plato, didn't just mourn him. They established philosophical schools, like Plato's Academy, that perpetuated his method and his ideals. And Plato, of course, meticulously recorded and interpreted Socrates' dialogues, shaping them into literary masterpieces that form a foundational part of all Western thought.
Right.
They essentially institutionalized Socratic ideals: intellectual honesty, critical inquiry, the importance of ethical living, the examined life. They ensured his method and his moral stance continued to influence generations upon generations of thinkers, politicians, educators.
Yeah.
His sacrifice is arguably a cornerstone of philosophical inquiry itself.
Wow. Okay, finally, let's talk about Guru Nanak, the founder of Sikhism. He emerged in the tumultuous landscape of 15th century India. His context was marked by immense social and religious fragmentation, wasn't it?
Very much so. Guru Nanak emerged in an era deeply marked by pervasive religious fragmentation. You had tensions between Hinduism and Islam, various sects within each. There was excessive ritualism that, in his view, often overshadowed genuine spirituality, and perhaps most pressingly, oppressive social injustice, especially the rigid caste system that dictated people's lives from birth, determining their status, their profession, who they could associate with.
A deeply divided society.
Deeply divided. He identified this religious division, the empty ritualism, and the systemic social inequality as the urgent pain of his era, something requiring radical ethical reform and spiritual unity.
And his purpose was truly revolutionary for his time, to preach a message of universal brotherhood, equality, one God for all.
Indeed. His core message was Ekankar. There was one creator. He devoted his life to preaching this oneness of God, universal brotherhood, equality for all people regardless of caste or creed or gender, and emphasizing inner devotion over outward ritual. He traveled extensively, incredibly extensively, across India and even beyond, to places like Mecca and Baghdad. And he confronted entrenched social norms, challenged powerful religious figures, often at great personal risk. His extensive travels, his willingness to engage in dialogue and debate, these were, in themselves, acts of profound, purposeful commitment, pushing against the strong currents of societal expectations.
What was his sacrifice, then, in the context of this model? He wasn't executed like Jesus or Socrates.
No, his sacrifice was different again. Nanak sacrificed personal comfort, security, the potentially easy life he could have had given his background. He endured significant hardship on his travels, faced opposition, ridicule, even danger at times, while steadfastly promoting his message of love, unity, and justice. His life was a continuous act of self-giving, rejecting the traditional paths of accumulating wealth or seeking power. Instead, he chose a life dedicated entirely to spiritual awakening and social reform.
So the sacrifice was his whole way of life.
In large part, yes. His personal austerity, his unwavering commitment even in the face of hostility, and his continuous, courageous confrontation of injustice served as his profound sacrifice. He demonstrated the truth of his teachings through his lived example, showing that love and equality were worth dedicating one's entire life to.
And his legacy, of course, became Sikhism, a vibrant, distinct faith tradition.
Absolutely. Sikhism institutionalized his teachings and those of the subsequent 9 gurus through its sacred scripture, the Guru Granth Sahib, which is unique in itself, considered a living guru, a repository of divine wisdom containing writings from Sikh gurus as well as Hindu and Muslim saints. And through community practices like langar, the communal free kitchen found in every gurdwara, which embodies radical equality by serving meals to everyone, regardless of caste, creed, or status. They sit together and eat together. And through the development of a distinct Sikh religious identity, shaped by its history and cultural context, his message of unity, Ek Onkar, justice, Kirat Karo Namjapo, Venchako, work, honestly remember God, share with others, and egalitarianism became the bedrock of a vibrant faith that continues to thrive globally.
So if we look at all 4 of these figures now, Jesus, Buddha, Socrates, Guru, Nanak, pulling it all together, what are the core comparative observations? What's a common thread running through these incredibly unique stories?
The profound commonality, I think, is how each of these extraordinary individuals internalized the deep collective pain of their specific era, whether that was Roman oppression and spiritual decay, or universal existential suffering, or civic decay and intellectual dishonesty, or social injustice and religious fragmentation. They felt it, and then, crucially, through an act of conscious will, they transformed that pain into a purposeful act of self-sacrifice, giving something up, comfort, status, life itself, for a greater good.
And that sacrifice becomes foundational.
Exactly. That sacrifice, in turn, was then institutionalized, codified, ritualized, becoming the foundation for lasting religious or philosophical traditions. What's truly striking, when you look at them side by side, is that despite vastly different cultural backgrounds, different historical epochs, even vastly different types of sacrifice, this core pattern of the sacrificial catalyst emerges again and again. It seems to transcend time and geography.
It really does suggest a universal human response.
It does, a response to profound challenges, an almost innate mechanism, perhaps, for societal self-correction and renewal.
That's a powerful synthesis. Now, let's really dive deeper into the implications of this sociocultural homeostasis model, because it fundamentally redefines how we might understand the role of these catalysts, not just as figures in history books, but as functional agents within a living societal system.
Yes, exactly. The findings for these compelling case studies we just discussed, Jesus, Siddhartha, Socrates, Guru Nanak, they really come together powerfully within this framework, this idea of sociocultural homeostasis. The pattern reveals that the sacrificial catalyst acts much like, as we said, a biological homeostatic agent, but within the cultural body, the social organism. They are, in essence, the society's internal repair mechanism, sensing and responding to deep imbalances, deep pathologies.
So they don't just observe the pain of the era from a distance. They internalize it. They embody it in a way that forces a societal response, like an antibody.
That's a good analogy, exactly. By internalizing that pain of the era, whatever its specific form, these figures don't just witness the community's dysfunction or crisis, they feel it deeply. They internalize it as their own burden. Their very being comes to reflect the societal sickness, in a way.
Right.
And then, their conscious choice to dedicate themselves to resolving this pain, often at great personal cost, initiates a process that's analogous to a healing response at the societal level. It's a collective correction, a systemic rebalancing act.
So it's about actively correcting those societal pathologies, like you said, like a social immune system kicking in.
Precisely. This response actively corrects underlying sociocultural pathologies, whether it's tyranny or spiritual alienation, widespread ignorance, pervasive injustice. Just as maybe a single-celled organism repairs internal damage to preserve its integrity, the sacrificial catalyst sacrifices personal desires, comfort, security, sometimes even life itself, in an act of what can be seen as redemptive love and profound courage.
And that transformation of suffering is key.
Absolutely key. The transformation of this deeply private and collective suffering into a clear, compelling purpose fuels incredible motivation within these individuals. It empowers them not only to endure immense pain themselves, but also to inspire collective healing and profound transformation on a massive scale.
That brings us to the dual role of the self-sacrifice itself. You mentioned validation, but also mobilization, right? Getting followers on board.
This is a critical point.
Yeah?
It really cannot be overstated. The willingness of these individuals to endure suffering, abandonment, ostracization, public humiliation, even a brutal death, it provides incredibly powerful validation for their message and their mission.
It proves they're serious.
It serves as a profound litmus test. It distinguishes authentic, unwavering commitment to the cause from just rhetoric or superficial belief, or maybe even opportunism. It says unequivocally, I believe this so deeply, I am willing to give everything, even my life for it.
And that resonates.
Deeply. This sacrifice resonates with followers on an emotional, spiritual, often visceral level. It catalyzes mass movements. It binds communities together through these shared narratives of redemption, hope, transcendence. It taps into something profoundly human, something archetypal.
So it's very different from, say, coercive or violent sacrifices we might see in some ancient rituals where someone is just offered up to appease a deity or something. This is different.
It's crucially different. The sacrificial catalyst sacrifice, as presented in these foundational narratives, is primarily framed as an act of unconditional love, profound empathy, and ethical courage. This reframes sacrifice entirely. It presents it not as a simple appeasement of angry gods or a mechanism for social control through fear, but as a creative, regenerative force for communal good.
Can you give examples of how that regenerative aspect gets institutionalized?
Sure. Think again of the Christian Eucharist. It ritually reenacts Jesus' profound sacrifice, not as a defeat, but as a central act of communion, of new life. Or Buddhist monastic discipline, which embodies the Buddha's renunciation through a structured life aimed at liberation from suffering. Or Socrates' martyrdom, which validates philosophical inquiry and ethical steadfastness as the highest pursuits, leading to wisdom. Or Sikh egalitarian teachings and practices like langar, which directly reflect Guru Nanak's selfless commitment to a casteless, unified society based on sharing. These examples show how the unique nature of each sacrifice becomes institutionalized as ritual, doctrine, or ethical practice, sustaining the group's identity and cohesion over generations.
Okay. And following that initial powerful catalytic event, the institutionalization and the development of those cultural remnants really take hold, often in refined and adaptive ways over time.
Exactly. Once that initial powerful catalytic event occurs, the sacrifice, the teaching, the example, the successors, the followers begin to consciously codify the narratives. They embed them deeply into doctrines, into rituals, into laws, into various cultural expressions. These are the cultural remnants.
And they're not static.
No, definitely not static. They are dynamic. They reflect both the foundational sacrifice and the evolving socio-historical context in which the community finds itself. This dynamic adaptation is precisely what enables continuity and resilience over centuries, even millennia. The message has to stay relevant.
And that institutionalization, while it's vital for endurance, it can sometimes involve tensions, can't it? Interpretations can diverge, conflicts can arise.
It absolutely can, and often does. As these movements solidify, grow, spread across different cultures, there are almost inevitably competing interpretations of the original message. There can be varying understandings of the founder's sacrifice, pressures from changing cultural landscapes, political interference. This can lead to internal tensions, schisms, theological debates, sometimes even violence.
But that's part of the process.
Paradoxically, yes. These very processes, even the conflicts, often represent the community's collective ongoing attempt to preserve what they see as the homeostatic gains, the healing, the new order, and respond to new challenges, ensuring the core message remains relevant in their eyes. It connects right back to Weber's theory we discussed earlier. Charisma, which is often ephemeral, tied to one person, becomes routinized.
Right.
The powerful singular moment of sacrifice transitions into enduring social structures, Churches, monasteries, philosophical schools, community organizations that can carry the message forward through generations, even if sometimes imperfectly or with internal disagreements.
So pulling back for a wider view, what are the broader implications for understanding religion and society through this particular lens? It sounds like it shifts our perspective quite a bit from more traditional views.
It fundamentally does, I think, in several profound ways. First, it highlights religion's role not just as static dogma handed down from above, but as a dynamic, adaptive mechanism for social and spiritual regeneration, a living, evolving response to human needs and societal crises.
More focus on function than just belief.
Exactly. Second, it shifts the focus away from purely metaphysical claims about divinity, though it doesn't necessarily dismiss them, to emphasize human agency in the process of collective healing. It really spotlights the profound capacity of individuals to internalize collective pain and, through these acts of purpose and sacrifice, impact entire societies, entire civilizations.
So it's about what we do, how we respond to suffering collectively, rather than just focusing solely on what we believe about the supernatural. It really empowers the human element in the story of religion.
Precisely. Third, it provides a powerful cross-cultural framework. It lets us interpret diverse traditions not as completely alien to each other, but as variations on common human responses to suffering, to ethical courage, to profound love. It helps us see the deep universal patterns beneath the incredible surface diversity of faiths and philosophies.
Finding the common ground.
Finding the common ground. And fourth, it offers a compelling explanation for why these archetypes recur universally across human history. Why do we keep telling these kinds of stories? Because they fulfill essential societal functions in maintaining coherence, in fostering collective identity, and in driving transformation when things go wrong. They seem to be part of humanity's ongoing social and spiritual evolution.
Wow, what a deep dive we've taken today. We've really explored this universal archetype, the sacrificial catalyst, uncovering how these extraordinary individuals somehow internalize collective pain and then, through purposeful self-sacrifice, ignite profound societal transformation. We've seen how this functions as a powerful sociocultural homeostatic agent, that societal repair mechanism. It's a really compelling model, I think, for understanding the very formation of major religions and ethical philosophies all around the world.
And just to reiterate the core argument, this model really foregrounds human agency, that profound ethical courage we see, and the potential for communal healing.
Yeah.
It puts it maybe more central than purely doctrinal or static explanations of religious origins often do.
Right.
It emphasizes sacrifice, not just as some grim necessity or tragic end, but as a potentially regenerative creative force that is truly foundational to social cohesion and transformation.
And the implications of this work, as we've touched on, they really extend far beyond just scholarly inquiry, don't they? Understanding the sacrificial catalyst archetype, thinking about it as sociocultural homeostasis, it could profoundly enhance contemporary discussions. Well, discussions on leadership, for example. What kind of leaders do we need? Discussions on social healing, especially in fractured times like ours. And maybe on the ethical responsibilities each of us has when confronting the complex collective crises of our own era. It gives us a framework maybe to recognize these powerful forces, sometimes operating subtly in our own world today.
That's a crucial point. Though it's also important, of course, to acknowledge the limitations and the necessary nuances of any such grand model. We always need to remember cultural specificity, historical contingency.
It's not one size fits all.
Not at all. The forms and meanings of sacrifice differ widely. They're influenced by factors like gender, race, politics, power dynamics, just as those academic critiques we mentioned rightly point out. There's a vital need for future research into maybe more marginalized figures or alternative healing models that might not fit this particular mold of a singular grand sacrifice. And certainly, there's always a need for critical ethical reflection on the potential risks involved in glorifying suffering itself. That's a delicate balance.
Absolutely. And this invites a really powerful question, I think, for you, our listener, to maybe mull over long after this deep dive ends. How might modern societies actively cultivate new catalysts for transformation, for healing, amid our current global challenges? And maybe even more personally, how can we recognize and engage with the sacrificial catalyst dynamic, this interplay of pain, purpose, and sacrifice as a living universal force, perhaps operating in our own world, maybe even within ourselves today?